Hi, I'm Debra, this is Booking with Debra. Welcome back to my channel. I've got no idea what the lighting is going to be like on this video. It's a nightmare. I'm currently using a ring light to see if it makes a difference. I've used a ring light in the past and it didn't work particularly well. So we will see if this video is okay. I think it's a bit weird as the lighting over here. But it's the UK, it's January, we've just got to work with what we've got, so bear with me if the lighting is terrible. Enough stuff about the lighting. The point of today's video, folks, is to share some of my favourite reads of 2021. I read 61 books in 2021, and as this is quite a new channel, I haven't talked about most of the books that I read in 2021. So I've decided to do this over 2 videos. I'm going to talk in total about 21 different books. Today's video is going to be looking at historical fiction and contemporary fiction with some honourable mentions, with some books. So those are books that kind of stood out for me, but they didn't necessarily become my favourite books of the year. And I've got 11 books to talk about today. In a future video, hopefully very soon, I will be talking about the remainder of the book, so another 10 books within the categories of classics, translated fiction, short stories, poetry, memoir and biography and non-fiction. So that video will be coming to my channel soon. So nearly all of the books that I'm going to be talking about as my favourite books were either books I borrowed from my local library, so I've already returned them, or they were books I listened to on audiobook. So I will try and share pictures of each book here as I'm talking about them. As I said, the first category I'm going to talk about is historical fiction. These books are all in no particular order. I'm not going to say I've got a favourite book of 2021 because I can't compare books that are very, very different to each other and decide on a favourite. So I'm just going to do them in a random order of books. The first book that I wanted to talk about, which was one of my favourites, was The Four Winds by Kristin. So this is a family drama, I would say, about a woman called, she starts out as a young woman called Elsa, and it's about her life and her family living on a farm on the Great Plains in Texas, and it starts out in 1934 during the Dust Bowl era. It's a part of American history that I knew nothing about before I came to this book, so I think the reason why I enjoyed this book so much was because it was something that I'd not read about before. It's about Elsa's fight to care for her family during that time, during all the difficulties within the Dust Bowl era. It's a story about survival, it's about hope, and it's about the lengths that people will go to protect the ones they love and care for the ones they love. For anyone who's read any of Kristin's books before, you know they can be very, very emotional, and this book was no exception to that. As an author, she has a real capacity to kind of pull on your emotions. I did find this book really compelling and listened to it on audiobook. And one of the things that I did with this book is I went to the internet afterwards to find out a lot more about the Dust Bowl era, and I love a historical fiction book that takes me to a different time and a different place that I'm not familiar with, which I then feel compelled to go and find out more about. My next historical fiction, one of my favourites, was Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sara. I reviewed this book in some detail in my wrap-up for Black History Month UK, so I will link this video in the cards and put a link to it in the description box below, so you can go and see my review in a bit more detail about that book if you would like to, if you've not seen that video. It's all about Frannie Langton, who is a servant and a former slave. He was accused of murdering her employer and his wife. That is not a spoiler because we know this from the outset of the book. This book is all about Frannie's story, and it's Frannie telling you her story in her own words, and I listened to this on audiobook as well. It was narrated by Sara, and she did a fantastic job. It moves through time from Frannie's time on a Jamaican sugar plantation where she was a slave to a Mayfair mansion in Georgian London where she's living with her employers. This was such a lyrical book. It was so engaging, and again it taught me things about history that I didn't know anything about, and I found myself going and listening to Sarah Collins on YouTube videos talking about what inspired her to write the book and her experiences of writing the book. And if that's something you're interested in finding out more about, if you check out my Black History Month wrap-up, I have linked those videos in the description box below when I went to find out a lot more about the author and the inspiration for this particular book. The next book I wanted to mention was The Exiles by Kristin Kline. This is a novel about three main female characters whose lives are bound together in the 19th century. There are parts of this book where we explore the lives of one of the characters who spends time in Newgate Prison in London and her journey on a prison ship as she travels to the penal colonies in Australia. Another of the key characters in this book is Martina, and she is a young Aboriginal girl who is forcibly relocated to Van Diemen's Land in Australia. And this character is actually based on a real young girl from history who we do know existed. So again, it's another historical fiction book that sent me to the internet to find out more about this real young Aboriginal girl. This book has themes about fighting for redemption and finding freedom in a new society. This is one of my favourite sorts of historical fiction book, where the author details at the back of the book the extent of all the historical research she did in preparation for writing the book and throughout the writing process. This book has a good plot and a range of characters, and again, it sent me to the internet to find out more, and I am still working my way through all of the research that I wanted to find out more about as a result of reading this book. I really enjoyed it. It was very atmospheric, and it really made me think about the lives of people who were transported to the penal colonies during that time. The next book I wanted to talk about was The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland. This is Australian fiction about Alice, a young girl who is the daughter of an abusive father. So trigger warnings for anybody who would find that a difficult issue to read about. This book's travel takes you from Alice's life as a young girl up to her becoming a woman and her later life. So it's a coming of age story, and then it develops as she develops into an adult. And it's all about how she has to learn to break away from the patterns of her past, to live within her own terms and find her own strength. It takes you on a journey of Alice's life spanning a 20-year period, and it moves from the sugarcanes near the sea to a native Australian flower farm and the Australian desert within Indigenous lands. There's a lot of nature and landscape within this book, and I really enjoyed that part of the book. It's very much interwoven throughout the book. Each of the chapters of this book is named after an Indigenous Australian flower, and it tells you all about the meaning of that flower as well. So if you're interested in nature, or if you're interested in reading around Australia, this might be a book that interests you. The next book I wanted to mention was The Islands of Mercy by Tremain. This is the first book that I have read by this author, but she does have quite an extensive backlist. She has a new release coming out this year called Lily, which I would really like to get to as well at some point if I can. Each of her books is very different in terms of setting and theme, so I don't think all of her books will appeal to me, but certainly some of her backlist books is something that I'm interested to get to at some point in future. This particular book, The Islands of Mercy, is set in Bath in 1865, where we meet a young woman who is renowned for her nursing skills, but it's all about her quest to go and find an altered life, and she travels to Paris and Dublin during the book in her search for this life that she wants. And then there's a second story within this book, which is based on the wild island of Borneo, where we meet a very eccentric British Raja. And the themes for his story is very much about his fragility and his fight against, I suppose, the greed of man, I suppose is the way you would describe it, the invasive power of the forest. This book has a lot of LGBTQ plus themes within it for most of the main characters. This book has been described as the exploration of the human need to seek places of sanctuary. What I will say about this book is I did enjoy the female character's story as she travelled from Bath to Paris to Dublin and back to Bath more than I enjoyed the parts of the book that were in Borneo. They do come together at the end, but I didn't find that they necessarily worked together throughout the book. However, it was still one of my favourite reads of the year, and it definitely made me want to read more of Rose Tremain. I really appreciated her writing style. The next book I wanted to talk about was Ghost Heart by Cecilia Samartin. And I spoke about this book in detail and gave a review in my Read Around the World Cuba video. So if you've not seen that, I will link it in the cards above and put a link to it in the description box below if you want to go and find out about this book in a bit more detail. This book is based in Cuba in 1956, where we meet two young girl cousins, Nora and Alicia, and they are very much part of the Cuban privileged class, and they live in Havana. The early part of this book is very much a coming of age story, and we move through the adult lives of both of the main characters. The basis of the story is very much about how both Nora and Alicia's lives are impacted by the rise of Castro. It shows Cuba before, during and after the revolution. Within this book I really did get a sense of what it was like for individual families at that time who were living in Cuba, and also those families that left Cuba and went to live in Miami in America. The next two books I wanted to share fit in a category for me called bedtime listens. So as you will know if you've been watching my channel for a little while, I listen to some audiobooks before I go to sleep at night. I literally fall asleep listening to the book. I do have the book on timer, so it shuts off after a certain time, so I can always find the place where I fell asleep each night to go back to it the next night. So I've got two books to mention in that category of books that basically helped me fall asleep. The first one of those is also historical fiction, and that is Mrs. England by Stacy Hawes. This book is based in West Yorkshire, England during the Edwardian era, and our main character is Ruby May, who is a young woman who graduates as a nursery nurse, and she goes to care for the children of a family of wealthy mill owners in their large stately home. This looks at an Edwardian marriage within that household, and it looks at power, issues around power, control, the roles and the lives of women during that era, and it does have some quite dark themes within it. I have read all of Stacy Hall's books so far, and I really enjoyed this one. I think Familiars is still probably my favourite book, but I found this a perfect bedtime listen in terms of the themes within the book, and it being something that was engaging enough to want to listen to, but nothing too difficult that would affect me trying to get to sleep at night. And then another bedtime listen for me, which is The Frequency of Us by Keith Stuart. That was another one of my favourite reads. I discussed this book in a little bit more detail in my autumn wrap-up video, so I will also link that in the cards and put that in the description down below as well. This book is a sort of split timeline, so in the contemporary timeline within this book, we meet an elderly man called Will, who has been identified as being vulnerable by social services and the local authority because of the way he is living. He is living in Bath in England. His home has become very dilapidated, and this is where we meet the second main character, which is Laura, who is a young woman who goes in to assess how Will is living and get a better understanding of whether Will is able to live alone still within the community, or whether he needs to be placed into long-term care. And when Laura goes to meet Will, he begins to tell her lots of stories about his time during the Second World War, and the story and the book moves backwards and forwards between contemporary times and the Second World War, where Will is reflecting on a time where he says he was married to a German refugee called Kline, and he tells Laura all these stories. Laura finds out from social services that there is no evidence that Will was ever married, or that this person called Kline ever existed. I won't say any more about the book than that because I don't want to spoil it for anybody who's interested, but it's all about Laura trying to find out the truth of Will's life and Will's history, and as I said, it interweaves between contemporary and Second World War time in Bath in England. So I enjoyed that as a bedtime listen. Nicely narrated, interesting enough to engage me to want to listen to it, but not in a way that would affect me trying to get to sleep. And then I just wanted to mention some honorary mentions in the category of historical fiction / contemporary books. Now these are books where something in the book or the story has had a real impact on me, so it was very impactful. With each of these books, it was very much about one of the key characters within the book and their life, and how them as a character and their life has stayed with me since I finished this book. However, they are not necessarily my favourite books of the year, maybe to do with the style of writing. So some of these books would fit more into the literary fiction genre. I don't always find that I enjoy literary fiction quite as much as other types of fiction, but I do sometimes read literary fiction books if the premise interests me or the themes interest me, even though sometimes the writing style is not always to my taste. So the first of those books that I wanted to mention was A Burning by Megha Majumdar. This is a contemporary novel set in India, and it has 3 main characters all dreaming of a better life. And the story is all about how each of their lives is completely changed as a result of an act of terrorism. As I said, although the writing style and the way this book was written wasn't something that I always particularly found easy to read, the characters within it and what happens to the characters by the end of the book is really compelling and has really, really stayed with me. Another book within the honorary mentions is The Death of Vivek Oj by Akwaeke Emezi. So this is a contemporary novel set in Nigeria. There's a lot of themes in this book around family and friendship and the challenges and expectations within families and friendships. It has a lot of themes around loss and transcendence. You know at the very beginning of this book that Vivek Oj dies because his body is found on the doorstep of his mother's house. But this book is all about Vivek's life and his story and what leads up to his death. Again, the character of Vivek and what happens to him and how it happens to him and why it happens to him has really, really stayed with me. I won't say any more about what goes on in the books, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it was very, very compelling and very moving. Again, the writing style was not necessarily for me, but the character has definitely stayed with me since I read it. And then a final book that I wanted to mention as a bit of an honorary mention because of the character that was in it is The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey. This is about a fisherman who discovers a young woman who has been cursed to live as a mermaid. Now, mermaid fiction, I don't know if that is a type of genre, but fiction about mermaids is not something I'm particularly interested in reading, but I was drawn to this because of my Around the World reading challenge. There's quite a bit of magical realism in this book, and it's all about the relationship between the fisherman and the mermaid. The mermaid, who's called Acacia. The thing that stayed with me from this book is the Acacia character and her transformation from being a mermaid back to being human, and the images that's created within this book. So Monique Roffey does an amazing job of describing the mermaid in this book, and it's very gritty, and it's not that kind of romantic idea of a mermaid that you get in sort of YA fantasy novels. It's very real, and I think that character will stay with me for a very long time. When I went swimming in the UK in September in 2021 in the sea, I'd had a little holiday and we spent a couple of days. I spent a couple of days swimming in the sea. The whole time I was swimming, I could not help but think about this mermaid character of Akwaeke and her appearance and how she felt and how she smelt and what she looked like and what she experienced. So the characters really stayed with me. Again, the writing style was not necessarily always for me, purely because of the writing and the characterisation within it. It certainly was a bit of an honour. It certainly is an honourable mention for me. Those are my favourite books of 2021 within the categories of historical fiction and contemporary fiction, with some literary fiction within it. A couple of questions for you. What have been your favourite fiction reads of 2021? I'd really love to know in the comments down below what your favourite reads have been. If it's something that I've read myself, we can chat about it, and if it isn't, maybe it's something that I can look to read in 2022. Just before I finish, I just wanted to let you know I will list in the description box below all of the books mentioned in this video. I am trying to post once a week every Saturday, UK time in the morning. If you click the bell down below, you will get notified every time I post a new video. If you've enjoyed this video, please like it. I would really appreciate it. I'd love to chat to you in the comments about books, so please comment down below and I will always reply. If you've not done so already, please subscribe to my channel. And for anybody who is on Instagram or who has not checked out my Instagram, I have linked that down below. That's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye.